Hello, my name is Megan and I'm an occupational therapy assistant student, and today I'm going to be teaching you how to create a milk paint watercolor project. I planned this intervention for a young boy with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, and I feel that it will benefit him because it does require some level of focus and attention in order to carry it out until completion, and it's also interactive and engaging, which makes that focus just a little bit easier. I do also think it would benefit a person with limited hand and wrist function because it does require pinching. You do have to have the ability to lift and hold a heavy object. And then you also have to be able to perform all of the movements at the wrist and forearm. So flexion and extension of the wrist, ulnar and radial deviation of the wrist, and then some pronation and supination of the forearm, because you are doing this motion quite a bit, as you'll see later in the video. And then you do also have to be able to draw and cut as well. So targeting a client with limited hand function, this would be a really great activity to engage them in because it, makes them go through the motions. And with any crafting activity, it does very heavily involve those hands. So to start this off, I'm actually going to be telling you all of the supplies that you need, as well as recommending a few others just in unique situations, or if you feel that you need those other options. And then I will be walking you through the steps while demonstrating how to complete your milk paint project. So let's get this started. To do the project, you will first need some kind of large dish. I've got a glass dish here. Tin or plastic will also work. The material doesn't matter as much as the size. It does have to be large enough to fit a piece of printer paper inside. Mine is a little bit short because the corners do fold when you put it in there, but it does still fit, which is why I've chosen to use this dish. Next, you will need to select what kind of medium in which you want your work displayed. So you've got three options for this particular project. You can use standard printer paper, which is what I'm going to be using today. You can use watercolor paper, which is a bit thicker than printer paper and is more receptive to color. So those colors will show up more vibrantly on watercolor paper. Or you can use a canvas. It really is up to you, and that's kind of where you have your own creativity and you've got your own freedom to choose. But as I stated earlier, I'm going to be using just your standard printer paper, so that's what I've got here with me today. You will also need a pencil and scissors. This is sort of optional if you decide to use printer paper to display your work, but you want it displayed on some kind of shape. You can actually hand draw that shape and cut it out, which makes it a bit more crafty. Obviously, if you're doing this activity with a young kiddo like I am, you may want to look into getting some safeguard scissors or providing assistance with cutting. And if you've got a client who suffers from depression and is prone to self-harm or urges to self-harm, you may not want to offer this option and instead just offer the two different kinds of papers or canvas. That way, these scissors will not be a trigger object and you will not have risk for injury. So that's important to consider. Next, you'll need tinfoil. Wax or parchment paper will also work, but the heavier the material, the better. This is where you'll set your product to dry, and it will be wet and drippy at the end, so you don't want to risk it bleeding or leaking through onto your table because you are working with dyes and dyes stain. So this is where you're going to be setting your end product is on a piece of tinfoil. Obviously, for a milk paint project, you need milk. The higher the fat content, the better, because a milk higher in fat is more receptive to color. I'm using Mouville whole milk from the farmer's market. Almond milk is another really good recommendation, and it is much more receptive to color as well. But I've got whole milk here with me today. You'll need toothpicks. Q-tips will also work, but this is what you're going to be using to manually swirl your colors and create patterns. You'll need dish soap. Any brand will work just fine. I've got Dawn dish soap here with me today, but this is actually going to be reacting with your milk and dye to create a swirling effect. And then in addition to that, you'll be doing the manual swirling with your toothpicks, which is what I've got here. Last but not least, you obviously need food coloring. I just have a standard 4-pack, so I've got yellow, red, blue, and green. I know that they've got pastels and neon colors available in stores, so if you want something a little bit lighter or brighter, you do have those options as well. But again, I'm just going to be using your standard 4-pack with yellow, red, green, and blue. All right, so I mentioned it in the beginning. Your first step is to select your medium. As I've already got mine selected, it's going to be printer paper. I am ready to roll. So for the purpose of today's demonstration, I'm going to be doing just a standard piece of printer paper. That's what I'll be dipping, but I'm also going to do a shape dip just so you can see what both end products should look like and what you have the ability to do with this project. So I'm going to take my piece of paper and I'm going to draw a heart and cut that out. You can do any shape you want. You can do a circle, a star, a square, a triangle. It's really up to you, or you can just stick to your standard printer paper and dip that in as a whole. So I'm going to go ahead and draw my heart, and you want it to be fairly large. The larger you draw it, the more colors you're likely to get on it. All right, so I've drawn my heart. I'm gonna go ahead and cut it out. Again, as I said earlier, with a kid, you may wanna offer safeguard scissors or provide assistance in cutting. I'm going to go backwards a little bit just while I'm cutting this out. I did mention some optional materials that you can have or use during this project. Option number 1 is gloves. If you are a person who would be bothered by dye on your fingers or color on your fingers, you may want to consider wearing gloves. I did a couple test runs of this earlier today and I did get dye on my fingertips. So gloves are an option, as well as a big loose t-shirt that you don't mind getting messy. I earlier today accidentally dipped my hair into the pan and then ended up getting dye on my shirt because the hair sat on my shirt. So that's another option as well. I apologize for forgetting to mention that earlier, but those are also, they can be included in this project. All right, set your scissors aside and then dispose of your scrap paper. I'm just gonna set mine aside for now, but I will take care of it during the cleanup. And I've got my heart shape cut out and ready to go. So I'm gonna set that aside with my printer paper. And I'm gonna bring this pan back into play. So the first ingredient you want to add to your pan is the milk, and you want to do a thin layer. If you do too much milk, you can end up with a soggy end product, and your colors might not also be as bright if your product is more wet than it should be. So I'm just gonna do a thin layer of milk here, and I will show you about how much I used just so that you have a reference if you ever want to do this independently in the future. So a little bit more just so it fills the pan. There we go. Okay, so I'm gonna scoot forward. I'm gonna bring the camera over to the pan. This is how much milk I've used. Here's a side angle so you can see the depth of it. It's not super deep. It's not super involved, because you don't want to make your end product soggy. So put the camera back in place and we'll keep moving forward. Okay, so this is the fun part. This is when you get to start adding your colors. It's recommended to do between 3 and 5 drops of each color. However, you really can do as many as you want. It's only recommended to use that amount so that you don't overwhelm the milk with just one color. If you do have a favorite, then definitely go up to 5 drops with that particular color. But 3 and 5 is the recommended range. I'm gonna start with yellow because that's my favorite, and I am gonna do 5 drops. You can do these drops in a design, you can do them in a pattern, whatever floats your boat. With yellow, I think I'm gonna do a dice shape. I'm gonna do a drop in the center, and then a drop in each of the 4 corners as well. All right, so I'm going to show you what that looks like. So I've got all of my colors added. And now I'm going to be adding dish soap to the mixture. This is what's going to create that reaction, so your colors will start to move on their own and blend. But if you don't like the outcome, that's when you'll involve the toothpick and do some swirling and pattern creating on your own. I usually add just a little bit of dish soap to the center, but you can add it in the corners, on the sides, wherever you want to add it. So I'm going to pour a little bit of that in there. And I'll let you see what's happening in the pan. So the colors are spreading out and moving. I don't know if you've got a better view of it there. All right, set that back down. Okay, so now I'm gonna take a toothpick and I'm gonna do some swirling on my own. So I'm gonna shake one of these out. And I think I'm gonna do up and down and then side to side and see how that starts to look. Okay, so this is what my pan looks like before I dip. Okay, so before you dip anything, this is when you want to set up your tin foil so that you've got a spot to put your projects to dry. So I'm going to do 2 pieces of tin foil. Oops. I'm going to do 1 smaller piece for the heart and then 1 larger piece for the full piece of paper. And again, to rip tin foil, you do have to rip along that serrated edge. So if you've got a kiddo, you may want to provide assistance there because it is sharp and they are at risk for injury. So I'm going to set this here. That's for my piece of paper. And then we'll do 1 smaller one. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and dip my heart in first. Whatever side you want the color on is going to be the side that you're placing it face down into the pan. You're just gonna rest it on top of the mixture. the paper will start to curl just because of the exposure to the soap and milk and the reaction that they've had together. That is okay. You're just going to unfold it and lay it flat to dry. So pick a spot in your pan where you think the colors look really nice. Go ahead and lay your heart down. You can push on it a little bit just to make sure that it's getting all the colors you want. Lift it up, let it drip just a touch. Uncurl it. And then you want to rest it flat on your tin foil that you've prepared. And then I'm actually going to add more color to my mixture because dipping the heart kind of disturbed the colors a little bit, and they're starting to blend and make more of a brown color. And I obviously want a lot of color for my paper as well. So I'm going to add a few more drops, and then I'll be putting a little bit more dish soap in to get a good mixture going. If you don't want to go through this process twice, it is nice to have an extra pan on hand, and you can just prepare 2 different pans for 2 different products, and that way you don't have to re-add colors. What color did I not use? I don't think I used blue. Okay, add a little bit more dish soap. Do a little bit more swirling. And then dip a second time. You'll know that the paper is making contact with your mixture because it does slightly bleed through onto the other side. So when you see that, you know that you're making contact. A little bit of white space on your paper is fine as well. So that's what I've got going on here. I'm going to lift and let it drip. You can dip it a second time if you don't care for the white space. Otherwise, you could call this good and lay it flat to dry. I think I might turn it and dip it a second time. The other great thing about this project is it's a really easy cleanup because you've got dish soap already in your pan. So you just have to rinse with water and the colors and milk and everything will come right out. We'll let that drip for a little bit. And then I'm going to dip this one white corner in one more time. There we go. Let it drip. And then lay it flat to dry on your tin foil. The drying time is anywhere between an hour and 2 hours. Obviously, you want to check back in and kind of monitor how it's drying to determine how long it needs to dry, but generally the time is between an hour and 2 hours. I made a couple of projects earlier today during some of my test runs. So after about 2 hours, I will make a second video and tie it into the first to show you all of the end products so you can kind of see what you're able to create with this kind of project. But that is the basics. That's how it's done. It's a lot of fun. I'm super excited to begin writing about it in my activity analysis document and discussing my case study and how this intervention can be tailored to him and made better for him, upgraded, downgraded, all of the works. But that is the milk paint project. I will show you what these look like while they're wet, and then I will check back in an hour to 2 hours from now to show you the end product fully dried. So this is the full sheet of paper. Oh, that's the pan. I'm sorry. I can't see what I'm doing apparently. This is my full sheet of paper. And then over here, I've got my heart. And then earlier today, I did a couple hearts and another full sheet. So I've got those drying over here, and that's kind of what those look like so far. But I'm excited to be able to share the end product with you soon.